Good day, everybody. Well, it's the 26th of April in the year 2020, and today is Worldwide Pinhole Photography Day. That's right, this is a once-a-year event where photographers worldwide celebrate the art and craft of pinhole photography. I've been trying to participate every year now for several decades, and I really have enjoyed doing so. And I don't shoot enough pinhole photography, and I want to do more of it. And every year when it rolls around in April, I think to myself, well, this is a great opportunity to kickstart my pinhole creativity. I hope you feel the same way. So today I'm going to go out and work on making some pinhole images. I hope you did too. Stay tuned. Well, you know, I have a lot of pinhole cameras. So one of the first problems I had was deciding which camera I was going to use today. And I've decided it was going to be one of the more recent cameras that I've built in my collection. This is a Cigar Box based pinhole camera that makes a circular image on a sheet of photo paper. Uses a 5-inch square sheet of photo paper, makes about a 4 3/4 inch diameter circular image. I needed to do a couple of things though to this camera before I can actually use it. I built it and used it the summer of 2019, so almost a year ago. So I haven't really used it since then. I need to do a little bit of modifications or upgrades to it, and then I can use it today. So this camera uses a sheet of 2mm, 2/1000ths of an inch thick brass with a hand-drilled pinhole. It has an internal shutter, and this is one of the modifications I did on the shutter pull rod, is a brass hardware nut to make a little pull, and I also included now some viewing dots on the top to get the angle of view set properly. I also made an internal little modification on this for the shutter so that when I close the shutter, it stops. One of the things I really like about these cigar boxes is they are built pretty well, considering you can often get them at a cigar store for almost free. They're using typically tropical woods, hardwoods, and they, like this box, has some joinery along the corners, which is kind of nice. And it has some nice decorative art advertising the brand of cigar product there. But this particular camera, the way I made it light tight, so I first saw the way it opens and closes with this lid, and there's this little lip around it that I painted black. I wanted to make a holder for my paper negatives, and I made it out of this cardboard put together with some glue and some gaffer's tape, and basically there is a slot in here that I can slip a 5-inch square piece of photo paper behind this circular mask. The circular opening is 4 3/4 inches diameter. There's also a slot in the back where I can store more sheets of photo paper if I need to, and so I could take this out in the field and use a changing bag and have multiple shots if I want to. So in use, you load the paper in there, and then you close the cardboard attachment up inside the box like that, and close up the box. It has a jewelry clasp like that, and it's nice and easy to close up and use. I use a wooden base, bungee cord the camera to a wooden base. The wooden base has a tripod bushing on it that I can use a variety of tripods, a little tabletop size for close to the ground, or taller tripods, or I can just set the box on any convenient surface. So I'm going to be using some of this Freestyle Photo brand Arista EDU Ultra. This is a grade 2 semi-matte RC paper. It makes really good paper negatives. The sky today is partly cloudy, and I expect the light will be coming and going, and so we're going to have to be careful about metering. And so I'm going to probably make an initial exposure and develop it, just to make sure that my F number and my exposure calculations and everything are correct before I go any further. Well, here's the setup for my first shot. Our little smiley face in the backyard. I'm going to line the camera up. I'm using an ISO reading of 12 initially, and my first reading is 8 seconds at f90.8, which calculates out to about 22 seconds at f150, which is the aperture of the camera. All right, looking for the viewing dots here. It looks like I'm okay with my framing. I could get in closer, but I won't. And then my level looks okay. Let's do this. 22 seconds referring to his wristwatch. Ready? Okay. So at 32 after, I will drop the shutter. Right about... See what we get. It's always good to do a first initial test to make sure your exposure and everything is good. There is a little faint texture of the brick wall behind it, and if we invert it, we might see those a little bit better than we do as a negative. It was okay. One of the things it does remind me of, though, is how wide angle this camera really is, because we were only about a little more than 12 inches away from the sun face, and man, it only takes up a small part of the image. We'll definitely have to get closer to it if we want to get a bigger image of it. Well, okay, so I've moved our camera closer to the sun face, so now our angle of view is kind of like from here to here, from here to here, and I'm going to give it 30 seconds exposure instead of 22 seconds. Okay, coming in for developing our second exposure, 30 seconds instead of 22 seconds. The light stayed about the same. All right, so let's get this out of the fixer into the rinse. It's definitely, we got more density here. Definitely got some tones around the thing on the wall, but it'd be nice to have a little bit more shadow detail. So I'm going to pre-flash the next image for about 8 seconds with my pre-flashing light source. Switched over to pre-flash here. Of course, I won't be able to show that to you. So this was the previous shot without any pre-flashing. And this was with pre-flashing. Nicely defined image circle. You can see the shadow of the sun face under here. You see the edge of the wall now, and this shadow of the wall and a little bit of the sky between the trees in the background, and a little bit of the mottled shading on the wall from the sun filtering through the trees in my yard. So nice shot. This is going to be really cool. The nose on the middle of the sun face is almost overexposed, I'd say, but I got one more shot in the camera. What I really want is just this tree trunk coming down, and then the base of the tree with this tall grass kind of in that round circle like that. I think it would be kind of cool. So trying to line up this shot perpendicular to the box, it's pretty much pointing right down to the base. So that's about where the middle is going to be, hopefully at the base of the tree. So you get some of the tree above it and the grass below it. I might want to move this box a little further up slightly on that little mini tripod. And then when we line up our viewing dots, looks like we should probably be a little closer. Now, one of the problems I can see already is this thing vibrates a little bit on this tripod, so pulling the shutter is going to be real tricky to make sure that we get it nice and smooth. So I think what I'm going to do is maybe put my hand over the opening, my finger over the opening, pull the shutter, and then wait for the camera's vibration to settle out before I release it. Oh yeah, this is kind of a cool image. The tones on the tree are really nice. The highlights are just shy of being blown out. There's still some detail in there. Some nice striated shadows. I got this fine detail in the grass, and I even got some gray tones on the blades of grass, which is really cool. Look along the edge of this image. Do you see where the pre-flashing ends, and then the image itself goes out beyond the pre-flash? Okay, so the pre-flashing ends, and then the actual image goes beyond it. And the reason why is because the angle of view of the pinhole is wider than my pre-flashing light source. Pre-flashing light source is built into this pipe housing. The light source is recessed up in there, so the cone of light is a little bit restricted in angle. This is a really good illustration of the effect of pre-flashing on the image, because you're actually seeing it in the same image. You can see the difference on that tree trunk. I enjoy contact printing. Fairly quick, and you get the satisfaction of seeing a real silver gelatin print from your paper negatives. You probably already have your chemistry poured up if you were developing your negatives as you were shooting, like I was today. So, hey, it's pretty convenient. You're already set up. Okay, so I'm selenium toning these prints, hoping to get just a little denser shadow detail, and also it'll make it a little bit more archival. Gotta wear gloves when you're working with selenium toner. It is toxic. So it's been about 6 minutes. My batch of selenium toner here I mixed up actually a couple years ago. It's been in a glass bottle for about 2 years, but after 6 minutes you might notice a tonal difference between these two, especially in the shadows here, like up here and down here and here. It's starting to get that kind of ruddy brownish look, which is kind of what you want. And I don't necessarily like to make it go completely brownish. I like to have a little bit of warm tone paper along with that selenium look in the shadows. So I'm going to let it go a little bit longer. But it does make the darkest shadows a little bit more dense, which is kind of a nice thing. Well, so the first image was this paper negative of the sun face, and it was obviously underexposed. I have a little bit of detail here on the sun face, some sky detail behind the wall, behind through the trees, but other than that, it's pretty dark. And then the next one is a closer shot. I got closer to the sun face. This is one of the challenges with wide-angle cameras, is you have to get closer than you think. I do have a little bit of the detail here in the wall. If I angle it, you can kind of see that, right? Some detail there, but not a whole lot. And then I pre-flashed the paper next. And so the first two were not pre-flashed. And so I'll compare without pre-flashing on your right with pre-flashing on your left. And you can see that I get a lot more shadow detail with pre-flashing. The last image I made was this shot, which I really like, of my tree. And then I have some contact prints. So this one here was a grade 3 filter. This is Ilford multi-grade 4 paper, this warm tone paper. So this is a grade 3 contrast filter, and this is also selenium toned. And I kind of like the way the print came out overall. Again, some of the parts of the face are overexposed, but that was kind of just the way the exposure ended up. I do like the way the slanting shadows are going across the wall and the texture of the wall. It's kind of cool. And then that tree image, I really think this was probably the best print of the day. Again, this was Ilford multi-grade 4, a contrast grade of 3, and it was selenium tone. You may be able to see those warm tones in the shadows. So I've been shooting pinhole cameras since the mid-1990s, and every time I do this, there are lessons that I relearn, are reinforced a lot of times. Because of most people being sequestered at home because of the COVID-19 viral situation, being able to find scenes around your house, around your home, was really a convenient thing to do. And actually, it's almost like a documentation of this time we're going through, which I think is important, right? But along with that, one of the things that's really nice is if you have a dark room that you can set up and use, pour up your chemicals, and you can use it in the daytime, it makes it really convenient, especially with paper negatives. You can shoot an exposure, process it, evaluate the results, adjust your exposure, and repeat. So it's an iterative process. One thing I find convenient about paper negatives is you have a much quicker data turnaround. What I mean by data turnaround is the time from image capture, image exposure, to seeing a finished image or a print much quicker than usually than film. So that means you can take single sheets of paper, you can expose, process them, and then evaluate your results, adjust your process with much less waste of time or materials. Conversely, the downsides of photo paper over film, of course, is they're not panchromatic, you don't have the dynamic range, nor quite the sharpness, and it's harder to enlarge them unless you have a custom-made reflection enlarger. Printing paper negatives, I find, are also really fun to do. You can contact print them, which is what I did today. That gives you probably the best quality, although the image size is usually fixed to that of the negative. You can scan and invert the image and process it in Photoshop, in software. That gives you a more flexible print size, and there's a lot more things you can do with the image in terms of colors and tones and effects than you can with a darkroom contact print. And then finally, there is what I call the iPhone quick invert mode, which is a really convenient way to get your image directly to social media as fast as possible. Now, this particular camera shoots these round images, and this is probably the first camera that I've built that does round images. And what I really like about it is, first of all, you don't have the effect of trying to line up verticals or horizontal lines with a frame, right? There's always the problem with rectangular or rectilinear images that trying to get the horizontals or verticals lined up to your frame that you display it in. But with circular images, like in this particular image, you might say the tree trunk is the only major axis. And really, if you frame this with a circular mat, and a circular frame even, the orientation of the image to the frame only matters when you hang it, right? So there's less problems with aligning the image to the frame when it's circular. And also there's no preferred horizontal or verticals, right? It's kind of, in some ways, reminds me of human vision, our field of vision. The primary center part of our vision is sort of circular, if you will. And also, historically, the circular image references the first Kodak Brownie box camera, which was a paper roll film camera that shot circular images on a roll of paper. You sent the whole camera back to Kodak, and they sent the camera back to you with your prints and the camera reloaded, which is kind of a cool historical thing. There's different philosophies about how people expose and determine the proper exposure for pinhole exposures. I start with a meter reading, which means I need to know the focal ratio of the camera, but I will adjust my process as I go. And today was a good example. I started out with an ISO of 12 on the grade 2 RC paper, evaluated the initial exposure, and then adjusted from there. And once you have that initial starting point, a lot of times it's just your experience that enables you to iterate, to make changes, and with this rapid turnaround of data that I get, having a darkroom port up within range of where I'm shooting at, I can just quickly make adjustments and reshoot a new image and dial in the process really easily. So sometimes experience is just as important as metrics or numbers or the technical side of it. And this reminds me that there's a large value in experimentation with this process, right? A lot of people want to know how to dial in the perfect pinhole camera design and the perfect exposure without themselves going through the process of experimentation. But I think that iterative experimentation process is highly important to the deep learning of the craft. You can't learn certain things without iteratively experimenting. So just being shown how to do something should only be a starting point into the craft and art of pinhole. You need to experiment from there, and that's a really important thing. Now, specific to this camera, right, it is a wide-angle camera, and there are some certain things about wide-angle cameras that you need to know. First of all, a wide-angle pinhole can really effectively separate the foreground from the background, like in this case. There's a lot of separation there between the foreground and the background, and it gives you the illusion of depth. But in order for that to work well, a lot of times the primary subject matter has to be really close to the camera. And in the case of wide-angle cameras, with larger sizes of film, the camera's shadow becomes a problem in the image. And so what I find works really well is side lighting the image. So here I just have a diagram of a subject, a camera pointed at it, and the light coming from the side slightly toward the camera. It eliminates the shadow of the camera becoming a problem in the image. It also highlights one side of the image, and it gives you a sense of depth and shading to the image, and also reveals more detail in the image. So I think it's natural when a person starts out in pinhole photography, especially if you're a guy, you want to make the images as sharp as possible. I think that's a good place to start, learning how to minimize camera movement when you open and close the shutter, learning to minimize tripod movement, like don't move your feet around if the tripod is sitting on a soft undergrowth filled ground cover or whatever. Learning how to make a sharp exposure is important. However, that's not the only thing, right? Sharpness is not the only consideration. One of the things about sharpness, though, is the shorter your exposure time, the greater the effect of momentary camera movement or subject movement on the sharpness or blurriness of the image. So for instance, if you're shooting film in a pinhole camera, and let's say your exposure time was, let's say, 3 seconds, and let's say during 1 second of that 3-second exposure the camera was moving, well, that means that 1/3 of your exposure there was movement. There's no one right way or wrong way. Just know that if you have a really short exposure time, like with a film camera, try to be really good about not moving the camera at all when the shutter is tripped. And so this brings to mind the point that there are no hard and fast rules. So sharpness should not be the only consideration. There's a lot of alternatives like tonality, fluid movement in the image, dynamic range, the curvature of the film plane, the granularity of the emulsion, processing artifacts. A lot of these combined together can make a really effective pinhole image. And a lot of times when I see these really wonderful images, I think the spectrum is really like it's emotion versus description, right? So a highly descriptive image is oftentimes emotionally sterile. There's very little artifacts of the process. It's trying to be kind of neutral in the way it describes the scene or the subject, whereas a highly emotional rendering has a lot of artifacts of the process in it, but a lot of times it can be a lot more expressive. So I think the importance of Worldwide Pinhole Photography Day is that it can be a springboard for you as a creative person to engaging into a more longer-term pinhole-based photographic project. You get your feet wet on the initial learning the ropes of how to do the technical side of pinhole, finding the optimal camera and film or paper combination that you like to work with, and then working on a project, a thematic series that you might even want to put into eventually a photo book or whatever. So I think it's a great opportunity to explore the more creative side of photography. Well, I'm Joe Van Cleve, and this was Worldwide Pinhole Photography Day for the year 2020. I had a great time, and I hope that this kickstarts more creativity with pinhole cameras. If you guys have any questions or comments, drop them down below. I'd love to answer them and love to have a dialogue with you about this creative art. And until next time, stay well, stay creative, and have yourselves a great day. Bye-bye.